Welcome, Lucy. Hi everyone, I'm talking to Lucy Yu from FiveAI. Thank you for accepting to do this interview with us this morning. Do you mind to introduce yourself and the company itself? I'm sure.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Lucy Yu. I'm Director of Public Policy at FiveAI. FiveAI is a British venture-backed company which is developing safe, autonomous, shared electric vehicle transport services for cities. And so my role is very much about working with governments and public authorities to make sure that we at FiveAI we understand the policy and the regulatory environment in which we're trying to operate, but also to help policymakers and regulators understand how that might need to change in the future to support businesses like FiveAI in trying to develop their businesses and services.
So do I understand correctly that you're developing the software itself, so it's not about the cars, it's the software that you plan
It's the software and then it's the service to customers, so it's both of those things. So if you like, it's a kind of a full stack model. So we're not manufacturing the vehicles, but it will be our software that is integrated onto them.
Right, and I read it yesterday as I was preparing for this interview that approximately 25% of people would use driverless car by 2030. Is it true?
Well, so there are a lot of different kind of forecasts out there. I think we have a view that the prevalent model in the market will be a service model. So people won't buy their own autonomous vehicle to use. They will actually call them up on demand. So there'll be shared fleets of vehicles operated by companies like FiveAI, and people will be able to book the specific journeys that they want to make, and that will become the prevalent use model. So exactly what those percentages look like and over what time frames, there's quite a bit of uncertainty, I suppose. I think it will be influenced by the kind of the early offers in the market and how customers respond to those. So.
What does innovation mean to you?
I think to me innovation is about applying new ideas to address challenges and open up opportunities in ways that create some kind of value for customers and society generally.
And why do you think that we definitely need to innovate? Why is it so important to innovate?
Well, I think innovation leads to the most the most valuable, the most enduring businesses. Innovation creates the things that customers really want. It creates very lively businesses. It creates businesses that are always striving to do things better, to provide better solutions for their customers, and that's the kind of the space that we're operating in. We've looked at some of the challenges out there in society. We've looked at how can we reduce the number of people killed and seriously injured on the roads. We've looked at how can we address really chronic issues of urban congestion that we have in our cities and towns at the moment, and how can we address issues of air pollution. So we think our solution is going to be able to do all of those things.
In terms of the ideas that you're gathering, I guess the word customer came up quite often. How do you gather ideas really for your pilots, and then how do you scale those ideas into actual services or products, or what's the process around that?
Well, it's a really good question. I think for us, normally in the technology world, you hear people talk about minimum viable product. And I think for us, ultimately, we're delivering a service to our customers. So for us, it's about identifying what's our sort of minimum viable service, if you like, for our pilots, and then working to put that out there, to have our kind of first small group of customers, and to make sure that we get feedback right across every area of that initial service. And then to use that feedback and to bake it into future iterations of the service. So it's really about kind of learning on the job almost. So putting something out there that is sufficient to start getting some customer feedback, but then making sure that we're very responsive to that feedback and we're adjusting the service and we're iterating and we're learning from that. And I think going from pilot to going to scale will be very much really understanding that kind of what makes a good customer proposition, and really ensuring that we get as much of that feedback as possible.
So in terms of innovation and customer feedback, how do you feed it then back into your evaluation process? I guess what good looks like. How do you know that you actually innovated and achieved what you wanted to achieve?
So one of the things we do is we work in quite a flexible way. So because we're a small business, we're not a large corporate. We're able to be quite nimble in our structure, quite flexible in the ways that we work. We have a lot of sort of almost review points baked into the ways that we do our development activities. So we have a lot of natural opportunities to look at what we're hearing from the kind of the world around us, what we're hearing from potential customers, what we're hearing from other stakeholders, and to make sure that we're able to feed that into the kind of business planning and our future activities. So I think a lot of it is just about getting everybody together on a regular basis, and making sure that we are feeding in from all of the different organisations that we need to work with.
And I guess you've been in tech for a while, so artificial intelligence is a massive buzzword at the moment, and the achievements with artificial intelligence, I mean the software you're working around, you can see how it changes customer experience. What's your experience around it? Compared to 5 years ago, today, in the next 10 years, how would artificial intelligence change customer experience?
Wow, that's quite a big question. I guess one of the things that artificial intelligence is doing is I think it's helping to close the gap between what the technology can do and what the customer would like it to do. So what a kind of an ideal product or service would look like. And I think AI is helping to sort of close that gap between the two. And I think it's helping to I think probably shorten product development life cycles. So a typical kind of life cycle of one sort of iteration of a particular product, going from one version to the next version. I think AI is helping to compress those timeframes. So it's helping to accelerate product and service development in the technology industry. So I think it's going to, over the next sort of 5 years or so, it's going to lead to some even more emphatic kind of changes within the technology industry.
Right, and I guess you've got competitors out there, but sources such as Forbes tipping you to surpass Google and Tesla in this space, which is quite impressive. What role does innovation play in you being successful in this space with such, playing against such huge companies?
Well, so it's definitely a very competitive industry, really competitive space. I think what I'd say to that is that there are lots of different ways that you could develop an autonomous vehicle and bring that to market as a service. There's no kind of one recognised standard or one recognised approach. And I think by being a very innovative company, we're able to, if you like, try a lot of those different approaches and you kind of work out which ones suit us best and which ones are likely to be best for different types of market, and sort of figure out which are which are the smartest approaches to build the most sustainable business, I think. So unlike larger organisations, we don't have to sort of pick a path and stick to it. We're able to change direction very quickly. So I think that's one of the areas we've got significant competitive advantage.
And in terms of, you mentioned a couple of times learning, and do you learn from your competitors, or how does, it's quite like a small market, I guess, but it's very challenging. How do you learn from other organisations?
Yeah, I mean, so I think, I don't know if I'd describe it as learning from our competitors. It's actually quite hard to get information about what others are doing because people keep their cards close to their chest in the industry. But I think definitely we monitor the environment generally. So we always have an idea what other companies are springing up, the types of approaches they might be using, the type of progress they might be making, and the kind of the parts of the market they might be targeting, and the types of business or service models they're looking to develop. So we're constantly monitoring the landscape, but we don't necessarily have very detailed information.
Do you manage to build relationships with different stakeholders to enhance collaboration, and that way kind of maximize outcomes for customers or for learning process, for best practice exchange or cross-fertilizing learnings? how would that go within your sector?
Well, I think probably a good example of that would be for our pilot services. So our pilot city is London. We're going to try to bring our services to market in London first, and then we'll learn from that, and we'll then gradually scale to other cities. We are in partnership with Transport for London for those pilots. We've been able to have some really useful conversations with them, discussing things like the data they're able to share with us to think about what those services should look like and which parts of London they should operate in and which times of day and those sorts of things. And also in thinking about licensing, what future licensing regimes for passenger services might look like. And they are generally quite inflexible at the moment because the regulations in some cases are over 100 years old, so they're very old regulations that we're trying to bring new technologies and new business models into that framework. So I think one of the things we're able to do is to help give Transport for London an indication of what some more modern regulations might look like.
You mentioned regulation a couple of times. I mean, we all know a lot about regulation and the importance of regulation within our sector. So really, regulation versus innovation, or regulation and innovation, what's your view around it?
Well, so I don't think they're natural bedfellows. I guess the sort of traditional view of regulation has been almost like a sort of a crime and punishment sort of view. So it's been looked at as something that's used to stop or to disincentivize something that's kind of seen as undesirable. And I think actually we're probably moving more into a world where regulation isn't that. It is something that actually can be used as a tool to encourage innovation. I think if you get it right, regulation can be play a really important role in helping organisations like FiveAI. It can certainly, for the type of thing that we're trying to do, which is very, very new and will have a really enormous impact on society. One of the things that is extremely useful for us is to have a sense of what the future regulatory environment might look like for the type of service that we're trying to develop. So I think actually, in some senses, regulation could help to give us some of that certainty and help to sort of de-risk some of our activities, and at the same time then also it just encourage more investment into this industry generally. So I think if it's approached in the right way, it can be a really useful tool to support innovation, and I think we'll start to see that those kind of shifts more generally, not just in our industry but in other industries as well.
Right, I guess data is another very important topic within your sector, and cyber security. So how do you mitigate the risk really around potentially somebody hacking a car, a driverless car, or how do you protect consumer data? I guess a lot of regulatory issues might be on your agenda currently to resolve those.
Yeah, I mean, so those are very big themes. I think for cyber security, we're very much adopting principles of what you might call secure by design, which means the idea of security is kind of baked into all of the processes within the business, and it's in everything we do. It's something that we think about, so it's part of our culture almost, rather than something that we try to bolt on as a secondary thing after we've developed our product. So security should be a thread that's running right through all of our activities. Data is a really interesting area. I mean, we obviously, along with a whole bunch of other organisations, will be subject to GDPR when that comes in. So we've got a bunch of procedures that we follow to make sure we're compliant with that. We do also use data. So we use data to support our innovation. So I talked about Transport for London. We have been able to get quite a bit of data from Transport for London and the London boroughs. And that's been really useful in helping us to pick out the routes that we might want to operate. Ultimately, we want to develop a fully demand responsive service, so it would travel wherever it's needed at whichever times of day, and it would be able to respond to things like major events and even things like changes in weather condition that might increase demand for the service and those sorts of things. But in the first instance, we will focus more around some specific defined routes just for the pilot, so we can learn a bit more about the technology and the service. And Transport for London have been really helpful in giving us some data to help us pin down where the demand is likely to be. And then also data from CCTV cameras, which we've been able to train our software on to understand the particular behaviours of other road users in London. So behaviours of other road users are a really a really critical element to developing intelligent self-driving software. So your software needs to be able to understand the other road users and to predict what their next behaviour might be and then react accordingly. And actually those other road users, their behaviours can be quite different in different areas. So the behaviours of cyclists and pedestrians, for instance, in London might be quite different from in the countryside, for instance.
It's quite impressive.
So what we're trying to do is to build models that really have that quite sort of localised sense of behaviours and are able to kind of come up with the most appropriate responses and the most appropriate directions to the vehicles. So those are two examples of areas where we've had data that's helping our innovations.
Are you working with open data? I would assume, like you're exchanging data with Transport for London.
Yeah.
Or is it like a city mapper type?
We do intend to give some data back. So we think it should be a kind of a reciprocal agreement, if you like. We haven't pinned down exactly what we will provide back from our service. I think that's something we'll have a closer idea when we get closer to our first operations. But we definitely think it's important that actually we are able to give something back to the cities that we operate in as well.
Earlier you mentioned culture, and I think that's also a very important theme, because we talk a lot about tech and innovation and data, but what are the really important aspects to you when we mention culture? Is there really a culture that enables innovation more than other cultures, talking about company culture, talking about your approach to innovation? What would be the main things that you would highlight as key culture ingredients for innovation?
Well, I think there's definitely, I think innovation, it really is a mindset and it is a culture. So it's not something that you can kind of you can bolt onto an organisation. It's something you have to encourage in every person within an organisation. I think one of the things that's important is just the space for people to raise ideas and think in a more open fashion, and to get together perhaps with people that they wouldn't normally work with. So I think not having processes and procedures that are too rigid and that don't present the possibilities for people to be able to raise ideas. So I think that's probably one of the first things that I'd say is just actually, if you're in a team or an organisation, look at how that's structured, look at what a typical working week looks like, and ask yourself what are the possibilities for people to have that exchange of ideas, to put new things on the table, to talk with different teams and to work across the organisation. And I think if you have a lot of that, then you have an organisation that's very conducive to innovation and a very kind of positive culture. If you don't have so much of that, then I guess my recommendation would be to think about how you can try to weave in some of those opportunities.
Is it important really to have a leadership team that creates a culture? Do you feel it's coming more from, it's a bottom-up approach? Should it be a top-down approach, or should it meet in between?
Yeah, I think a bit of both of those. So I think people definitely need to feel they have permission to innovate almost, and I think that permission, some of that comes from the top of an organisation. So I think the senior leaders need to kind of lead by example. So that's sort of actually sort of modelling innovation in their own behaviours. But it's certainly one of the things they can do is to, within the organisation, to really help create that space for people to exchange ideas. But then from the bottom-up side, I think definitely people need to feel kind of comfortable raising their ideas, comfortable coming up with ideas. able to feel they're in an environment where they can exchange ideas safely with others. So I think it's a bit of both of those really.
And my last question would be, what's your biggest learning on your journey of innovation so far?
Well, I think probably what we have talked about. So innovation is very much it's something that has to be baked into the culture. So it's a mindset. I think it's something that you can develop in an organisation. So I think it's something that can be learnt, but it's very much about creating the right structures for people to work in. Almost kind of a no idea is a silly idea kind of culture, making people feel safe to be able to raise ideas, but probably also having some procedures that enable you to pursue specific ideas, but also ensuring that you have review points in place that you can kind of evaluate them and say, are these kind of still working for us? Is this going where we hoped it would go? And if that's not the case, then you can knock it on the head and try something else, try a different direction. So I think it's that combination of enabling a space for ideas to flourish and people to come together, but also having some kind of procedure or enough structure around that to be able to try them, but try them as far as they're going to go, and recognise the ones that you should run with and the ones that you should put to bed.
Great, thanks so much, Lucy, for having us today. One really last question: when are you launching your pilot? Because I'm really excited about this. I would really like to try it.
Yeah, so hopefully in 2019. So we're going to spend pretty much all of next year doing our internal testing and development. So we will have some cars on the roads in London, but we won't be carrying members of the public yet. We'll just have our own employees and engineers in them. So we'll be gathering some kind of information and other bits and pieces that we need to get to the point where we're ready to start carrying members of the public, and hopefully that will be in 2019.
How exciting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you see you from FiveAI. Thank you.
Thanks.